Alrighty. Well, let's go ahead and get started. We are at the top of the hour and we have a lot to cover today. So I will make sure that we are recording. It looks like we are set to go. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Zoe Zirup. I'm the program coordinator for the Great Lakes Business Network. And if you're not familiar with the GLBN, we represent a network of more than 240 businesses that strive to protect the Great Lakes and our regional economy. We focus on shutting down the Line 5 pipeline, advancing clean energy, and protecting and restoring the Great Lakes from threats like microplastics, invasive species, and more. We're grateful to have each of you here with us today as we call foul on the fake energy emergency promoted by the federal administration. Our panelists will counter the falsehood of the truth Our panelists will counter the falsehoods with the truth of clean energy's potential to slow down climate change and protect this rare and beautiful place we love, the Great Lakes region. Before we get started, I wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping. We ask that each of you use the Q&A function to ask your questions. We will circle back to your questions at the end of the webinar, and we are recording so we can share this at a later date as well. We have a wonderful lineup of speakers with us today. First, we have Attorney General Dana Nessel, who's leading some of the most important environmental legal battles in America today. We also have the widely respected Dougles Jester, considered by many to be Michigan's clean energy Yoda. And we also have regional clean energy expert Courtney Brady. To set the scene a little bit for today, in January 2025, President Trump declared a national energy emergency. The order has fast-tracked fossil fuel expansion, enabled sloppy permitting processes, and damaged the health of the people on the planet. This was all, of course, to unleash American energy. Together, the Energy Emergency Declaration and the Big Beautiful Bill have canceled or delayed 354 clean energy projects across the nation and prompted the EPA to attempt to roll back 33 critical pollution standards. Under the administration's leadership, we have been told that fossil fuels are king and that clean energy is to blame for our energy problems. We've been told that increasing fossil fuel production and reliance is necessary for a stable grid, will bring more job security to the workforce in the United States, and reduce our reliance on foreign producers. Well, we haven't seen that play out so well. We've gotten ourselves stuck in a foreign war with Iran, seen gas prices skyrocket in just a few short weeks, and seen an 11% increase in household gas bills compared to 2024. The president has taken a false energy emergency and turned it into a really real problem. He's weakened our nation's ability to be more energy independent by singling out and slowing down the advancement of clean energy. As climate change harms every state in the country, our top federal leader is denying reality and causing further harm. This is the real emergency. So today, we will take a deeper look at each of those issues and hear about the solutions that exist to get us out of this crisis. So let me introduce you to our panelists. First, we have Attorney General Dana Nessel, and as many of you may know, she has been a long champion for consumer protections, protecting the health of Michiganders and the environment. She is actively involved in challenging the U.S. Department of Energy's orders forcing the J.H. Campbell plant to stay open, and is suing some of the world's largest oil companies for their alleged decades-long role in keeping renewable energy and electric vehicles on the margins. I'm also pleased to introduce Courtney Brady with Evergreen Action. Based in Illinois, Courtney Brady is the State Advocacy Director at Evergreen Action, where she leads clean energy and transportation campaigns across Midwest battleground states. Courtney will detail the very real implications of the declared energy emergency and the multitude of ways the president has used his executive power to roll back energy protections and advance the pro-oil agenda. Lastly, I'm pleased to introduce Douglas Jester. Douglas is a managing partner at Five Lakes Energy and a current GLBN member. He specializes in economic analysis and modeling for energy policy and often provides expert witness testimony before utility regulatory commissions. Douglas will share his insights on the bright future that clean energy offers. So at this time, I want to thank you all again for joining us, and I'm going to hand it over to AG Nessel for the next 10 minutes or so to highlight all the different ways that she is bringing justice to clean energy.
Well, thanks, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody at the Great Lakes Business Network and, look forward to being part of this important conversation. So going all the way back to 2025, which seems like a million years ago at this point, President Trump signed an executive order that falsely and improperly declared a national energy emergency. So just to be clear, US energy production remains at an all-time high, and major energy companies have stated that they do not plan to increase output because of this nonsensical order. The Trump administration is invoking emergency authorities for non-emergency projects to keep the nation reliant on dirty energy sources like coal, oil, and gas. So this executive order would fast-track fossil fuel projects, allowing them to bypass long-standing environmental review processes under important laws like the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, and the Historic National Preservation Act. Every guardrail that exists in order to protect our health and the health of our precious Great Lakes. And as if their motives were not transparent enough, the order also excludes specifically wind, solar, and batteries, which of course are among the cheapest and cleanest modern energy sources that exist today. So the Trump administration is crying wolf over a non-existent energy emergency while undermining every effort made to increase the efficiency, affordability, and the reliability of domestic energy markets. Now, the real energy emergency is the one that Trump himself is creating. So over the last year and change, my office has filed more than 50 lawsuits against the federal government. As a result, we've managed to preserve well over $2 billion in funding for vital programming that the Trump administration has tried and failed to steal from our communities. On the environmental front, we've successfully thwarted the Department of Energy's attempt to place an arbitrary cap on reimbursements for state-run programs to weatherize homes for better efficiency, monitor supply chains, and forecast the state's future energy needs. And we've sued to restore grants for the construction of electric vehicle charging ports and to unfreeze federal approvals necessary for the development of wind energy projects. We've also restored $29 million in funding for municipalities to complete 24 open projects across the state, proactively fortifying their local infrastructure against natural disasters, which we badly need now. Courts across the country are finding that the Trump administration's actions have violated the law. But more than that, each of these cases is just an example of the Trump administration trying to sabotage the federal government's previous commitments to drive down energy costs and to combat the effects of climate change. So let's just take one example, the project that's known as Solar for All. In 2023, Michigan had the highest average residential electric rates in the Midwest region. And it's almost double the region's average when you exclude our state from the calculus. So the Solar for All program promised to reduce utility costs for approximately 16,300 low-income Michigan households to the tune of about $400 a year in savings for the next quarter century. Great program, right? Michigan's Solar for All plan had been approved by the EPA in 2025, and our state was set to use more than $155 million in grant funding to install about 190 megawatts of new solar generation capacity and much more energy storage that would have created about 700 well-paid jobs over the next 5 years. And let's remember, of course, this is our money. Michigan residents and businesses, right? We all pay taxes to the federal government, and that is then appropriated by Congress, and it's sent back to our state in the form of important cost-saving programs like Solar for All. So the first two rounds of awardees had already been selected when the Trump administration announced that they'd be shuttering the program with absolutely no notice of any kind and also no explanation. So my office, in concert with state AG partners from across the country, we filed multiple lawsuits that are making their way through the courts as we speak. But in the meantime, Michigan's 13 Solar for All projects are just stuck in limbo, unable to move forward while the Trump administration essentially holds our tax dollars hostage. If the federal government genuinely cared, if they really wanted to accelerate the production of domestic energy, they wouldn't be fighting tooth and nail to eliminate programs like Solar for All. Under the guise of this so-called energy emergency, the Trump administration has also repeatedly ordered Consumers Energy to maintain operations at the outdated J.H. Campbell coal plant in West Olive. This emergency power is typically used really as a temporary stopgap measure to prevent blackouts when you have something like, for instance, a natural disaster happening. It's not meant to mandate the long-term enterprise of a private business. Now, the J.H. Campbell plant was originally built in the 1960s, and it was scheduled for retirement a mere 8 days following the receipt of this first order. To date, the Trump administration has filed no less than 4 of these consecutive 90-day extensions, keeping this carcass of a coal plant operational like something out of Weekend at Bernie's. Uh, Campbell can't use long-term coal contracts to save money. It has to spend around $4 million a month in retention pay just to keep staff on. And the aging facility is in need of extensive repairs. So the plant costs way more to operate it than it could ever recoup in profits. Now, my office is arguing the validity of the first emergency order next week before the U.S. Court of Appeals in the D.C. the D.C. Circuit Court. The state worked with consumers to develop a plan for the plant's retirement, and that includes the procurement of replacement power resources. And Michigan residents were expected to save in the neighborhood of $600 million for this transition. But instead, in the 10 months between May 2025 and March 2026, Consumers Energy reported that this ridiculous directive has instead racked up a tab of at least $180 million that will now have to be collected from ratepayers. And that meter is still running because every day that this plant is forced to stay open is another day Michigan residents are footing the bill for the president's latest vanity project. Now, we've finally gotten to a point where renewable technologies are becoming more cost effective than the hazardous fossil fuels of the past, and the market is responding accordingly. So earlier this year, my department filed a lawsuit against BP, Chevron, ExxonMobil, Shell, and the American Petroleum Institute. And we argued that we could have reached this point many, many years ago without their collusion and their interference. Now, this lawsuit technically has nothing to do with the Trump administration, but for the fact that Trump's DOJ tried to preemptively sue my department to stop us from pursuing this case before we had even filed it, which is outrageous. Our lawsuit alleges that these companies violated long-standing state and federal antitrust laws by working together to block competition from cleaner and more affordable energy alternatives, which drives up the cost for Michigan families and businesses. And instead of competing to offer better and cheaper energy, these companies secretly agreed on a coordinated strategy to suppress renewable energy technologies and to curtail the build out of supporting infrastructure. Now, our complaint describes a long-running pattern in which these companies allegedly portrayed fossil fuels as the only realistic option, while behind the scenes coordinating to slow down the development of viable alternatives like EVs, solar, and other renewables. This collusive conduct kept Michigan locked into higher cost fossil fuels, reduced innovation, and a distorted consumer choice in the state's transportation and primary energy markets. And this case is not about setting climate policy, it's about enforcing competition laws. And we are asking the court to put a stop to these collusive practices, restore fair competition, and secure monetary and equitable relief for the state of Michigan and her residents who, in accordance with our allegations, have been paying a supra competitive energy prices for many, many years. Our goal is straightforward. It's to ensure a fair, open energy marketplace where innovation, lower cost technologies can compete on the merits so that Michigan consumers and businesses are no longer stuck paying a premium for big oil's public relations. And we expect oral argument in this case to take place in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Michigan, probably late summer or early fall. But these companies, as you know, are so powerful. They are so experienced at manipulating the political currents of our discourse, and their industry has enjoyed decades of institutional support. But I maintain that they are still not above the law. And you may have heard that earlier this month, the United States Supreme Court ruled unanimously in favor of my department, sending our Line 5 lawsuit back to state court where it has always belonged. We filed this lawsuit in state court against the Canadian oil company Enbridge to shut down the Line 5 dual pipelines in the Straits of Mackinac all the way back at the very beginning of my first term in 2019. Line 5 presents one of the biggest man-made risks to clean water in our state, if not the entire country, if not the entire world. And the location of the dual pipelines, which carries millions of gallons of oil every day exposed to the open water at the bottom of the straits, combines great ecological sensitivity with exceptional vulnerability to anchor strikes. Now, the water currents in the straits are nearly 10 times as strong as Niagara Falls, constituting a significant strain on aging infrastructure. And every day, we are risking up to 700 miles of shoreline, the unique ecosystems of fish, birds, and wildlife who call that shoreline home, and our own recreation and tourism industry, which represents hundreds of thousands of jobs and millions of dollars in profits every year. Line 5 has already been struck by anchors twice in recent years that we know of, in 2018, again in 2020. Not to mention, of course, Enbridge's 2010 Line 6B rupture in Michigan, which was one of the largest inland spills in history. 882,000 gallons of oil, which spilled in a tributary of the Kalamazoo River, and it took Enbridge over $1 billion to clean it up. A major spill would be absolutely catastrophic for so many reasons, but perhaps most importantly, because it would directly threaten the drinking water supply that serves nearly 40 million people. And we would be cleaning up the Great Lakes and our shorelines the rest of our lives, the lives of our children, and generations to come. We know Line 5 has not gotten any safer with age. It was constructed in 1953. The pipeline is now 73 years old, and it was meant to be decommissioned after 50 years. So it's very much operating on borrowed time. And we don't need it. There are numerous other ways that oil products can be transported to the customers that need them without endangering the Great Lakes. Enbridge has another pipeline, Line 78, which goes around south through the Chicago area. And it doesn't cross the Great Lakes at all. And it has excess capacity. And there's also railroad infrastructure that can be used to transport oil products. There's other oil sources like bringing it up from the Gulf region through other pipelines that don't cross major water bodies. The economic impact of an orderly court-ordered shutdown will be nothing compared to the economic, not to mention environmental impact, if the pipeline ruptures and is shut down with no warning. And a report by PGL predicts markets would adapt to a shutdown of Line 5 within only 6 to 12 months. So we argued this case in state court based entirely on state law for more than a year before Enbridge filed to remove it to federal court. Procedurally, they were supposed to have made that request within 90 days. They took over 887 days. So we've been fighting ever since to return the case to the proper venue in state court. And recently, the Supreme Court ruling put an end to Enbridge's forum shopping maneuvers and will hopefully expedite the resolution of this case. But Michiganders are starting to recognize that our reliance on analog technologies, especially in the energy sector, is taking its toll on our environment and our economy. So now is the time to act with absolute urgency, to invest in solutions for the future, not roll back the minimal progress we've made so far. And the Trump administration wants you to believe we're suffering under an unprecedented energy emergency, but their actions tell a much different story. So thank you so much for allowing me to be here today. I will tell you that my office will continue to defend Michigan residents and our environment with every tool at our disposal to protect our precious natural resources and deliver an affordable energy future, at least until January 1st of 2027. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. It's just great to hear your passion and get those updates from you as well. So thank you so much for all your hard work that you're doing protecting consumers, our environment, and speaking up on behalf of the people. We're incredibly grateful to have had your leadership for the last 8 years and know that you've championed our concern. I know your work isn't over, so we're fortunate to still have you for a little while longer, and there are many battles to be won. So thank you for being here with us today, and I know you're going to stick on for the Q&A section. Appreciate that. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Courtney with Evergreen Action to share more on the regional and state updates regarding the clean energy economy and the consequences of the attacks on clean energy and how the market is shifting.
Thanks, Zoe, and thanks so much to JLBN for having me here and the Attorney General for her great remarks. She's doing what a lot of Attorney Generals in states should be doing in the moment that we're in. I'm going to talk a little bit about, dive into kind of the federal landscape, including funding resources that states have or do not no longer have access to, and then a little bit about how states are responding or should be responding, and then how that's resonating with everyday people. Just gonna hop to the next slide. So overall, we're facing a massive whiplash in the federal policy space. What we saw under the Biden administration was really focused on energy resource expansion, particularly adding clean energy resources to the American grid to make us more economically competitive and to modernize our grid in the way that many other countries are. And supply funding to states and incentives for companies to really engage and do that. What we're seeing now is the complete opposite of that. We're seeing the pulling back of funding and the artificial propping up of dated and expensive and pollutive energy resources, as the AG talked a lot about just now. So while this is happening, this policy whiplash federally, states are facing massive consequences of that. So not only are they having to adjust to less funding and, you know, like trying to legally understand what rules and regulations rollbacks mean from the Trump administration, we're also facing the reality that electricity demand is growing for the first time in over 4 decades, and people's electricity bills are going up. This is a very new extreme way that states are seeing this right now, and it's really resonating with everyday people. So what we're seeing happen federally is making these consequences much greater and more difficult for states to navigate in this moment. In the very short term, there are still incentives and federal funds available to states to some extent. A lot of this remains tied up in litigation and legal proceedings. But those incentives, in many cases, are expiring very soon or have expired, or they're subject to increasingly difficult compliance standards, which we'll dive into. So really, I think overall, what states do in this moment is really indicative of how well we can respond to the affordability crisis that's really top of mind for folks right now. So we can hop to the next slide. The next one. So as I talked about, states are in this whiplash moment. Implementation is happening at the state level for a lot of federal grant programs, but there's a lot of timeline uncertainty right now. So programs that were supposed to be longer term, things like the Solar for All program, which the AG just talked about, the home energy rebates, which are being rolled out across the states in the Great Lakes region. They're happening, and states are using that funding while the time exists, but that uncertainty is causing a lot of fear in rollout. And in fear that this funding gets pulled back by the federal administration, which is making it increasingly difficult for states to understand how much is in the coffers for them to use for energy resource expansion in particular. So I think this really comes to light in 3 ways: this actual federal grant stability, plus increasing supply chain concerns that we have. So the expensiveness of which tariffs from this federal administration are putting on, it's making energy resources much more expensive to build, less predictable to expand. That's creating the global conflict, and as well as the global conflict. And then lastly, I would just mention that permitting and siting remains a problem for clean energy projects, particularly in the Great Lakes region. There's a lot of siting restrictions that are happening. These 3 things together, federal funding loss, supply chain uncertainty, and this permitting uncertainty and difficulty, is making it really, really difficult for states to really move forward on clean energy right now. And there's a lot of ways for them to be doing that, which we're going to talk about a little bit in a minute here. But just would note that it's, these things, the confluence of these issues is really creating major consequences at the state level. We can hop to the next slide. So I'm going to dive a little bit and do this quickly because there's a lot of compliance legal language associated with this. But into kind of the incentives, the grant programs, and the federal rules and regulations and what's happening there. The biggest tax credit program I want to point to, which clean energy developers as well as utilities have access to, are wind and solar tax credits for building the solar and wind projects and then using them for electricity generation. So there's two tax credits associated with that. That is expiring on the 4th of July this year. So projects have to be in contract, or they're calling commenced construction, by the 4th of July for ability to use those tax credits. So that is a massive program that is phasing out very quickly here. So we're kind of seeing a solar and wind boom at the beginning of this year because there's so much pressure to uptake those tax credits in the midterm because the discount is so significant. That is expiring soon, which is going to result in a lot less of these projects coming online. And then I want on the other side of this, so that's closing really quickly. On the good news side, the energy storage tax credits are available on longer timelines. But kind of all of these tax credits are now subject to restrictions, which I'll talk about in a few slides here, on federal entities of concern is what they're called, which is making it more difficult for these projects to get cheaper and accessible sourcing to build them. So we can hop to the next slide. And then the grant programs, which the AG did a great job kind of explaining, is that, you know, a lot of this money is just the federal administration has done everything within legal question to pull back funding that has often cases already been rewarded and in contract. Like I said, states are moving forward with these programs conservatively as legal or as litigation continues and results haven't been seen for many of these lawsuits. But again, it's created a lot of fear and, yeah, a conservative approach to these programs in a way that we didn't expect until the administration tried to pull back all of these funding. So this kind of speed and the legal compliance in which states are able to move these projects forward will really be indicative of how successful they are. One highlight I do want to point to is that a lot of funding for rural cooperatives has not been pulled back. So, you know, we have a lot of rural cooperatives in the Great Lakes region in our states here. A lot of these cooperatives proposed projects that would add a lot of solar and wind to their energy resource mix. And we have not seen that funding touched yet. I want to say yet with a big asterisk because we know this administration has come for everything. But that is great news for people who rely on these rural electric cooperatives. It will help with energy cost mitigation in the long run and improve reliability of their resource mixes. So one place we haven't really seen the administration attack is these rural focused programs. So that is one silver lining here. We can hop to the next one. Like I said, the big concern now regarding even the use of these long-term tax credits that were preserved by this administration is really these foreign entity of concern requirements as well as tariffs. Tariffs have made it far more expensive to get the sources, and then the foreign entity of concerns restrictions are primarily based on how this administration deems other countries' risk to the United States, which obviously we've seen a very aggressive global approach from the Trump administration that list continues to be uncertain and growing. So it's going to make it harder for companies, utilities, and states to navigate when projects qualify based on these foreign entity of concern requirements. One note about the Great Lakes region in particular, that one maybe kind of silver lining here is that the Great Lakes region obviously has an incredibly strong manufacturing base given all of the industries that we've had here historically. That makes our workforce and our infrastructure a little more advantageous to do domestic supply chain and domestic building here. But with the concerns around tariffs and just how expensive everything is getting with inflation continuing to go up, that is going to make it a lot more challenging in a moment where affordability is top of mind for everyone. So in the long term, we might see benefits to the Great Lakes region in terms of manufacturing here with clean energy, but it's really challenging in the short term with how expensive everything is. Hop to the next one. I'm not going to get into the extent of the ways that the Trump administration has just come for every climate policy and regulation at the federal level, honestly, to favor corporations, especially fossil fuel corporations. But I would love to point folks to the Climate Action Campaign's tracker, which I put a link to at the bottom of the slide, which really goes from day one of the Trump administration to now and the extent of the rules that they have peeled back at the federal level. One, I think, major highlight, which I'm sure most folks on this webinar are aware of, is the endangerment finding, which basically puts into question if the federal government and states can regulate anything as it relates to pollution from corporations. But I would strongly point folks to this resource to kind of look at the extent of what the attacks the Trump administration has put on this. It's even, far more aggressive than we saw last term, the first Trump administration term as well. Not to the next one. So I would just tie this all together by saying, data centers in particular are driving major load growth for electricity. This power demand is creating impacts on folks' electricity bills. In response to this power demand, utilities are really using this as a moment to capitalize on being able to build new energy sources. And what happens on the state level is going to be really determinative of two things. One being, how clean is that power that we're getting? And two being, what are the impacts on people's electricity costs? So, in particular, regulations via the legislature, but more so even at the public service commissions on the state level, is going to really determine how new power infrastructure gets built out and what that will mean for costs. So that's all to say that, without this clear policy intervention at the state level, because it's non-existent at the federal level at this point, it's going to, make people's electricity bills more expensive. It's not going to allow us to hit our clean energy goals. Illinois, Michigan, Minnesota, they all have electricity bills in statute. And the way that the states put guardrails on data centers and load growth in particular is going to be really determinative if we can meet those goals. And also to say that because of all of these things and the way people are seeing their electricity bills skyrocket, energy policy is becoming kind of a kitchen table issue, top of mind issue for people in ways that we haven't seen in the past. So I think my last slide here is that people are really responding to that, and polling is backing that up. Over 8 in 10 people, and this is of last year, so this may have even grown since then, are seeing significantly higher utility bills. And people are really blaming corporations and their utility companies, as well as politicians not taking action as the reason for this happening. And on the flip side of that, they're really rewarding leaders who have strong energy policy plans right now. We saw that in 2025 key gubernatorial races in New Jersey and Virginia. The winners of that had really robust energy policies, in particular, talking about expansion of clean energy to meet growing demand and keep costs at bay. They won those races, and even deeper polling showed that they were far more trusted on the issue of energy policy than their opponents. And again, they were really championing clean energy, which shows that people can see clean energy as an affordability solution. And it's really on us to continue communicating that message and ensuring that our leaders at the state level understand we want clean energy going forward as a response to all of these things going on, and as very opposite to what's happening federally. And I think that is pretty much a good summary of all of the things going on, very high level, and we'll have time for questions at the end. So thanks, folks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Courtney. And please, everybody, keep the questions coming. I see you all have found the Q&A function, so appreciate that. And we will get to those in not too long. So as the AG, Nessel, and Courtney have highlighted, there's a lot of antiquated thinking that is doing real damage to our pocketbooks, our environment, and the economy. We've been misled by fossil fuel giants for years, and now it's certainly time to correct course. While there are many growing pressures on our energy grid, we have the tools and we have the knowledge to address and make these changes in a responsible manner. We are in an energy crisis, as we've been talking about, but we must use the tools that are best suited to fix them. The canceled energy projects that were in the queue that Courtney highlighted briefly would have produced enough power to generate power for equivalent of 14 million homes. And without them, of course, we're seeing the utility costs go through the roof, good paying jobs are being slashed, and we're more dependent on volatile foreign oil markets. So the administrative actions are also dramatically, of course, increasing air and water pollution and hurting the resources that we love and depend on. One fact I do want to highlight here before we transition to some of that solutions-based conversation, We know from recent reports, both in 2024 and 2025, wind, solar, and battery storage made up 96 and 92% of the US power generation capacity. So the market is certainly telling us that these solutions work. So these technologies, alongside many others, offer significant capacity to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, create new jobs, and reduce our contribution to climate change and environmental pollution. So at this time, I am pleased to pass it over to Douglas Jester, again with Five Lakes Energy, to dive into some of these solutions and speak to the market, leaving us with a bit of hope.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I want to just begin by acknowledging how much Attorney General Nessel has invigorated the department's role in energy regulation. It's been a great advantage to us in addressing both the transition that we're going to talk about and keeping things as affordable as possible. So just want to say it plainly and again, fossil fuels are the problem, not the solution. The burning of fossil fuels is a source of about 90% of climate change. And for most energy uses, renewable electricity is or soon will be cheaper than fossil fuels. It's true now for power generation, ground transportation on a life cycle basis for light duty vehicles and coming for medium and heavy duty. For domestic heat, space heating, and water heating in replacement of delivered fuels like propane and fuel oil. We're not quite there yet on natural gas, but we will get there. And then beginning to be so for low and medium temperature industrial heat in things like food processing plants and paper manufacturing and so on. And then, it's often said that sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, which we can address with storage, and I'll talk about that. But fossil fuels are not always available as expected. On the next slide, show you the price of crude oil in 2025 dollars, so adjusted for inflation, per barrel. And when people like me go and look at the economic modeling, the claim is that the cost of oil is about $60 a barrel and projected to continue at that level for a long time. But as you can see here, that's almost a floor. That big drop in 2020 is COVID when everyone stopped driving. But we have a series of idiosyncratic reasons, such as the current Iran war, but every few years there's some problem that upsets the oil market and drives prices up. So the real price of oil is higher than is typically modeled by economists because of these real world events that disrupt the market. Next slide. We'll talk a little bit about the solutions. I'm going to be pretty quick and brief. I like to get in the weeds, but we don't have time for that. We can meet our energy needs and goals with clean energy and new technologies. And I'm going to talk a little bit about expanding solar and wind, scaling battery storage, engaging customer-owned energy resources in what we've come to call virtual power plants, and enabling efficiency and electrification in the end uses of energy. And then partly because the rapid growth in electricity demand due to data centers are exacerbating and highlighting some of the challenges we already had in making the kind of rapid transition we should. I want to talk a little bit about meeting the moment there. So in Michigan in 2023, we had a package of bills adopted by the legislature, signed by the governor, that raised the standards for the use of renewable and clean sources of electricity. I'm not going to run through the details here, but generally we are pushing towards 60% of electricity coming from renewables by 2035 and 80% from clean energy by 2035 and 100% by 2040. Clean energy is defined as essentially renewables, nuclear, or natural gas plants that are 90% effective in capturing and permanently storing carbon dioxide emissions. I do want to say, just for clarity, that these standards do not prevent generation in Michigan that is not renewable or not clean. Utilities have to produce about 10% more than they sell to cover line losses in transmission and distribution. And a Michigan utility can produce more than they sell to their customers and sell that excess into regional markets. That flexibility is intended, but it means we're going to have more work to do post 2040 to finish eliminating the use of fossil fuels for power generation. Next slide. So one of the issues that comes with using more renewables with their variability due to, when the sun shines and when the wind blows, is that grid balancing is somewhat harder. We've always had to deal with grid balancing because the amount of power demanded varies moment to moment for a variety of reasons, including being driven by weather. We used to address that with combustion turbines using gas that could be turned on fairly quickly and turned off fairly quickly. But now batteries are really rapidly improving and will displace gas plants in future utility plans. Next slide. So the Lazard Investment Bank has been publishing annually a summary of the levelized cost of different technologies for power generation. This is their 2025 graph. It's a commonly referred to by people like me as a measure of what is going on. You'll see at the bottom, gas combined cycle. That bar represents the range of costs that we typically see. Above that, you've got coal, nuclear, and gas peaking, and you can see they're all pretty expensive. And then higher up, you see the renewable generation options. And onshore wind, including with storage attached, and similarly solar, utility scale solar, also with storage attached, are cost competitive now with gas combined cycle plants. And gas is not getting cheaper while renewables are. So as we go forward, the economics are very much in favor of making this transition that we in Michigan have mandated to generating power with renewables. Next slide. It's challenging to build enough utility scale renewables fast enough. And we have another option, customer energy resources. So this would be behind the meter solar storage. And we can orchestrate those into what's called a virtual power plant. It's basically having them turn on and off in a way that meets the grid's needs and helps to balance the grid despite changes in power supply on the grid. Pointing to Australia here, it's not on the slide, but in Australia, the cost of rooftop solar is about 40 cents a watt of capacity. In Michigan, it's $3.20. And it's nearly that high in most of the US. And the difference is tariffs and other trade barriers and utility and other sort of bureaucratic barriers to people adopting these things. It takes 4 inspections generally for a rooftop solar system in Michigan to be installed. In Australia, they do audit inspections once on a fraction of the systems because they have a different approach to the regulatory system. And then last year, Australia started a cheaper home battery program and in 6 months installed nearly 166,000 batteries. So that gives you an idea of the pace at which this can be done. Excuse me, next slide. So we have, over the last 20 years, gotten a lot more efficient at using energy in the United States. but there's still room to do a whole lot better. So if we were to apply all cost-effective energy efficiency measures, we would reduce electricity usage by 20 to 30% for the things we currently do with electricity. That also gives us the opportunity to electrify a lot of things we currently do with fossil fuels, vehicles, space heating, water heating, and each of those can, on a life cycle basis, save customers energy costs. It is more expensive currently to buy an electric vehicle than an internal combustion engine vehicle, though that gap is rapidly closing. But when you consider the cost of fuel and maintenance over the life of the vehicle, it's cheaper to own an electric vehicle now. And similarly for these other technologies. If Michigan were fully electrified on these end uses, our electricity rates, the fixed costs of the grid and so on would be diluted, and our rates would be about 20% lower. And our total energy bill would be about 30% lower if you consider the costs of gasoline and other fossil fuels that would be displaced by the increased use of electricity. But electrifying requires support systems. It's not a matter of each individual, doing their thing. It's not workable to use an electric vehicle if there isn't public charging available. And today, if you call up your local HVAC contractor and say, I want a heat pump, many of them will say, oh, those don't work, or I don't, supply them. So we have to build the supply chains and the infrastructure to make it possible for individuals to do what is in their best interest and also in society's best interest. That's an area of public policy work that we still need to do. Next slide. So now I want to talk about data centers just a little bit. We do have now 2 major data centers that have signed contracts for utility services, and more are in the wings, expected to come over the next couple of years. And they do create challenges for us. Those are broadly in land use, water use, and power. And I want to talk about each of those very briefly. So from about land use, data centers come in a wide range of sizes, but the current growth is in what's called hyperscale, really big data centers. And those are typically large buildings on clusters of buildings on hundreds of acres. Large available sites are generally rural greenfield sites, mostly in agricultural use, and rural communities often resist large facilities. So we have land use conflicts arising over these large data centers. Lots of local governments wrestling with whether they want this kind of use in their community. And because of tax policy in Michigan, we've taken away most of the local benefits of having large facilities in communities that used to incent them to accept such things. So there's really no reason why they shouldn't resist. Next slide. On the water side, data centers don't inherently use water. They use a whole lot of electricity, which becomes heat. Removing that heat from data centers efficiently requires liquid cooling, which is often done with water. And water cooling then requires that the heat in that water be transferred to the air or be evaporated with part of the water or discharged as a large quantity of moderately heated water. And many of those can be problematic. So we have a lot of water, but obtaining large quantities to evaporate or discharge as heated water creates problems. And we have only a partial sort of regulatory scheme for that. Next slide. Most people are aware of the data center power challenges, but they consume very large amounts of power. The 2 that have been approved are gigawatt, which is a very big number, roughly 1 million times what a house uses. And the cost of supplying power could be shifted onto other customers. The Attorney General and others have been intervening at the Commission to make sure that doesn't happen. And good regulation can prevent this cost shift, but it's something we do have to worry about. Data centers can be built quickly and much quicker than power supply can be built. There are important competitive advantages to data centers getting built quickly, especially in the artificial intelligence area. So they really are wanting to move quickly, and that runs up against the barriers we have to rapid deployment of new power supply, and so is one of our challenges. And I want to talk about that speed to power problem just a little bit more in the next slide. So one of these data centers can require a 10% increase in our power supply. And we're currently going to have two, and they're expecting maybe another 3 or 4 over the next year or so. The power sector development of new generation is typically closer to 10 years, and the data centers can be built and operational fully within 2 years. And that conflict is the speed to power problem. And that will either limit data center development or require the power system development to accelerate. Next slide. So this graph sort of illustrates the point. The bottom row there is the timeline for the data center development. The one above it is for batteries, and the one above that is for solar. And then further up, you get into wind and gas power plants and the like. That well illustrates the challenge. You'll note in the timelines that much of the timeline for deploying power plants is in planning and permitting. So just to sort of highlight, the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, which operates the transmission system in the Midwest, requires new generation to get an interconnection agreement so they can protect the transmission system from overload and those kinds of things. They have not approved, other than on an emergency basis, a generator interconnection agreement that was requested any later than January of 2021. So 5 years, just to get approval. That is really a significant constraint, not only for serving data centers, but for states like Michigan, Minnesota, and Illinois that are trying to make the clean energy transition quickly. I've been very worried, even before data centers, about these barriers. And these have gotten worse under the current administration, both the transmission review, but also there are currently 165 wind projects that are waiting approval through federal permits for things like not interfering with airports and so on. And that's a deliberate policy of sitting on these permits. So if you're worried about affordability, you price sort of the balance between demand and supply. We have the administration pushing demand and market forces pushing for more demand while they are deliberately restricting the supply of new generation resources in order to protect the legacy ones and drive up their value. And that is creating affordability problems. The price of new electricity has increased substantially over the last year or two, and will probably continue to as long as these policies remain in place. So the solution, I think, is really let's enable the helpful technologies to move forward as rapidly as possible and bring things back into balance. Thanks.
Thank you, Douglas. You summarized that so nicely there at the end with the compounding issues that we're dealing with. So I really appreciate that and you sharing all your expertise and just reminding us that there are some really amazing opportunities for us to get creative with our energy systems. I'm thinking back to yesterday when a few of us were at the conference in Lansing, and the keynote speaker, Allison Clements from FERC, was talking about carpooling and how it was just such a good analogy. Like, you don't have empty seats in your car when you have an energy crisis. You're trying to make sure every seat is full when you're going somewhere. And so let's use those virtual power plants and maximize our opportunities before we start overbuilding and going into all these more maybe expensive options. So really appreciate that, and I hope everyone here knows that they're not alone in the fight for the future, for a more prosperous and sustainable future. As you have seen today, there's a lot of folks that are really fighting for true energy independence, fighting to lower our energy bills and take action on climate change. So at this time, we're going to transition to the Q&A, and I see there's a lot of questions in the Q&A section. So we will address those. And then if you are with the media, we ask that you raise your hand and I will unmute you. And that will be the best way moving forward. So AG Nessel, thank you for hopping back on. And I know we have a couple questions directed at you. So I will kick off this first one. It's a little bit lengthy as far as the bills that were listed, but it says the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has supported a plethora of permitting and regulatory reform bills, such as H.R. 161, 4214, 4218, 6373, 6387, etc. Do you support any of these bills, and do they really help us expand clean energy distribution?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a member of Congress, so for pending legislation, it's rare that our office gets deeply involved or weighs in. In the state legislature, on occasion, we'll be asked to weigh in on bills. I will say the fact that they're supported by the Chamber of Commerce, and that they involve permanent and regulatory reform. Most of what I've seen coming out of the majorities in both the House and Senate is an effort to deregulate in a manner that it undermines our environmental laws. And it's been mostly helpful to the oil and gas industry, and assisting fossil fuels much more so than people who are involved in clean energy production or innovation. So I can't tell you that I'm familiar with those bills, but I'm not particularly optimistic that there will be any bills that will pass and will be signed by this president that aren't detrimental to our environment and our public health.
Yeah, thank you for that. One other question for you is wondering, you said Enbridge Line 7B around Chicago would spare the Great Lakes. How could the public help press for using that pipeline instead of Line 5?
By contacting, your elected leaders, right? I mean, the arguments that Enbridge makes are traditionally about federal preemption. Well, if that is true, and we don't accede to that particular argument, but if that is true, then certainly, talking to your senators, talking to your United States House of Representative members to pressure the Department of Transportation, who oversees PHMSA. I mean, that would be something that you could do in terms of the federal government could actually take action. And when it comes to our state government, obviously, some of the things that have occurred involving Line 5 over the course of many years happened involving the governor and the state legislature. So, we have an election year. Everybody's up. So I would suggest that talking to people who are running for Congress and talking to people who are running for our state legislature and talking to people who are running for governor, this is all important to let people know, look, there's another way to do this. And it would be so much better for the Great Lakes, so much better to protect our environment and honestly protect our economy in Michigan. And that there are other options out there besides just the one option that Enbridge wants, which is, of course, to keep Line 5 running as long as possible and to build a tunnel that, there have is a lot of controversy about the tunnel and how that would affect this very ecologically sensitive area of our state. So I would say talk to everybody who's running for everything and let them know how you believe this is an issue of great importance. And then, hold them to their promises. I have tried my hardest to keep my commitment to the voters of this state for, in 2 elections. I've tried my best. Not everybody does that, but you should hold people to their word if they make you an express promise about what they plan to do if or when they take elected office.
Yes, thank you. Not just the GLBN, but so many organizations in Michigan and regionally, as well as tribes, are really working to make sure that the permitting is done correctly on different projects that are being proposed and that our voices are being heard. So we really appreciate having your allyship in this fight. How many years in are we now? Decades. So thank you for taking that one. Another question here, and I'm going to combine two of them. And Douglas, this may be for you, but other folks please chime in. It says, any of the proposed data centers in Michigan benefit the grid in any way? Are they being done right? And then a second piece to that would be, has the state of Michigan incentivized the construction of data centers?
Well, let me start with the last part first. In 2024, the legislature passed and the governor signed 2 bills that allow for the exemption of data centers from the sales and use taxes that otherwise would apply to the equipment they put in the data centers. Because they replaced the computers every 3 to 5 years, that's actually quite a significant economic factor for data centers. That was viewed as an incentive and is functioning as an incentive for data centers to choose to locate in Michigan. There are some conditions for that exemption. They have to meet some employment levels. They have to be energy efficient in the data center itself, meeting certain standards. There are some provisions about water use. They are supposed to be at 90% clean energy within 6 years. That's allowing for some of that buildup that we were talking about earlier. And if they meet all of those, then they get this tax exemption. The 2 data centers that have been proposed, one for Oracle near Ann Arbor, and one recently proposed for Google near Belleville, are still going through the regulatory processes. But my read right now is that the Oracle data center may be problematic in terms of what they've committed to pay for and whether it really gets us to the 90% clean standard that they should be meeting. The Google contract appears to satisfy those standards. Both of them need careful regulatory treatment before the Public Service Commission to make sure they don't shift costs onto others.
Yeah, I would just add that, we're seeing a lot of political backlash to data centers in general. I think it was like yesterday I saw a poll that like 16% of people support the build out of data centers, which is like alarmingly low regarding any economic development thing. And I would just say that the reality is like we're not going to stop every data center from being constructed in our region. And getting involved with the dockets at the Public Service Commission is incredibly important in every state across the Midwest. So even if you're not a legal intervener and you don't have lawyers representing you or your organization in those processes, you can still submit public comment. And that is an incredibly important way for the PSC to understand that we want, to make sure the costs of data centers do not fall on people's electricity bills and that they are building their own clean power with that increased demand. So I would just say that like the reality is we're not going to stop everything, but there's a lot of advocacy we can be doing to make sure harm is reduced and that we're getting at least more clean power online in turn.
And I will follow that up by some of what we've learned is there's thousands and thousands of comments going into the Public Service Commission on these data centers. That's fairly unheard of. The Public Service Commission is an unknown entity to a lot of the public, so that is one place where we can certainly get involved and be uplifting our concerns. I know we have Brian with Planet Detroit, so Brian, I'm going to allow you to come off mute if you wish and ask your question.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, that is working.
Okay, great. This question is for Douglas. Uh, you had mentioned this mismatch between the time it takes to bring data centers online versus the time to get new generation and transmission online. I was hoping you could just give us a sense of what that means in terms of increasing electricity prices or potentially creating other issues for ratepayers.
Sure. So before I get to the more technical aspect of it, I just want to say that whether there are cost shifts onto other customers just very much depends on the quality of the decisions made by the regulators, by the Public Service Commission. They can make decisions that allow costs to be shifted or costs for other customers to increase, or they can make sure that that doesn't happen. And we need them to measure up to that. Underneath, there are absolutely some increases in costs that the utilities will incur in order to serve the data centers. And some of those are permanent and sort of easily addressed through the regulatory process, and some are temporary because of the surge in demand. So the Oracle deal with DTE is just a good example. I'm not meaning to single that out, but Oracle's data center will be a 1.4 gigawatt data center. That's about a 10% increase in the electricity sales for the state. The agreement that they have with DTE is that they are paying for 1.4 gigawatts of storage that DTE will own and operate. And that meets the need for capacity at peak times. But there's not any provision in that agreement for the actual production of electricity. That's going to be done later. And at the speed that Oracle will come into operation, new generation will not be available. We have a lot of power plants that are not used all the time because we need them to be available at peak times. And so they can run to charge that storage and to meet the data center's demand much of the time. But that means we're running gas plants that are less efficient than the ones that ordinarily run. And that increases the price of power, wholesale price of power on the grid, and can increase the cost that is passed through to all of the customers until enough new generation is built to meet that incremental demand at with more appropriate clean energy resources, things like that. So there's definitely an effect here that we have to worry about of increasing wholesale costs that's going to show up on everybody's bill, and then over time that can be managed so that there's not an increase for everybody else, but we still need the commission to demonstrate that they're able to do that.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, Brian. All right, one question we also have, I think there's a lot of folks here can answer this. I know it will probably play into the antitrust lawsuit that's happening as well. The question is this. So energy experts say that when new solar costs drop to 2% per kilowatt hour, we'll have reached a tipping point because solar will be less expensive than operating existing fossil fuel plants. We are now nearing the 2 cents per kilowatt hour cost. What is your take on what that will do to propel a far more rapid transition to solar and other renewables? And I think I would add on to that, if you win the antitrust lawsuit, what are the solutions then to stopping those activities that are like coming against us? If that makes sense. Anyone feeling eager to take that one?
I can start. I think that, in my mind, we've kind of reached the cost argument, right? Like if you just look at the facts, like the cost of solar batteries are cheaper than building new gas. And I know we're talking about operating gas here, but I think this has to do far more with political inertia than it does actual like core economic arguments, unfortunately. So I think that the work that's happening via the AG's office, as well as the state action that's happening, again, I would just say at the public service commissions in particular, is going to be really determinative of what happens next. So I know that certain states like Wisconsin don't have as transparent processes at their public service commission. And the push for that kind of transparency and accountability is, I think, really going to be the difference maker in terms of what sources are chosen to power our generation going forward. So it's less to me about like making the comparative side by side on the costs and more about what's happening at these public service commissions and the political influences behind them. So yeah, I would just say this has a lot more to do with, in my mind, with political inertia and the kind of favoritism that we've seen by the federal administration, honestly, a lot of the times at the state level for fossil fuels. And that's really where we're seeing a push for more transparency. And that's where we need to continue pushing.
Okay, thank you, Courtney. This one is for the AG Nessel here. So how can we have approval for data centers such as those planned for Selene and Ypsilanti when questions about water, electricity, and environmental concerns have not been answered? My bills are high and I only see them growing. People who live near them do not have answers.
Yeah, it is a very significant problem. These incentives for these hyperscale, data centers, the incentives were passed without, in my opinion, the appropriate guardrails in place. And I don't believe that the Public Service Commission has done us any favors in terms of being very specific about who's going to pay, for instance, for the additional energy infrastructure, how it gets paid, what happens if the bubble bursts and these companies go out of business. And so, of course, them paying for the infrastructure is predicated on them still being operational, which we don't know that they'll be for very long. And remember, the way in which their payments are structured take place over the course of like 20 years. We don't know that you think OpenAI is going to still be around in 20 years? I highly doubt it. Maybe Google will, maybe Meta will, but not all of these companies are going to. And it creates a really significant issue in terms of how this is going to get paid. And what about the decommissioning of these facilities? If they're not putting money aside in escrow or something, who's going to pay when it's time for these facilities to be taken apart, or if there are environmental issues involving these facilities, which could happen as well. There are so many different ways we could prevent these worst outcomes from happening, but so far we don't have any of that because the Public Service Commission has been wholly unwilling to demand that from the utilities in their contracts with the data centers. And we haven't seen any interest from the governor or the legislature. I mean, we have bills that have been proposed, but they're going nowhere slowly. And again, I would just say we have an election coming up. We get to pick our next governor. We get to pick our next state senate. We get to pick our next state house. And this should be one of your top issues in mind is what are you going to do to protect us to make sure that as a result of this massive increase in the amount of energy that is going to have to be produced, again, right? So the Selene Township Center just by itself is the same as operating 1 million residential households. That's crazy. And when we don't have any guardrails in place right now. And so I would just encourage people, to make sure you're letting people who are running for these critical positions know how you feel about it. And that you really don't take no for an answer on this and you hold people to account, because I have to say, this is not a problem for us in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. This is a problem for us next year and the year after that. And I think we are going to see, as we've seen in Virginia and we've seen in other areas, a sizable, significant increase in our utility bills, and we're going to see an issue with these rolling blackouts, not just because of climate-related issues, which is already a problem, but because, these facilities are going to be sucking so much power that I think it's unknown as to the impact that it's going to have on the overall grid. Even if the promise is we're going to build up the grid, it takes twice as long to build energy infrastructure as it does to build the data centers, which are going to go online immediately as soon as they are finished being built. So we have a lot to be concerned about in Michigan. It's not that we can't do anything about it. It's that our elected representatives seemingly are unwilling to do anything about it.
Appreciate you taking that one. Thank you. One additional one, switching here a little bit to the rural co-op, Douglas, that you touched on earlier. Someone is asking, is there a way to move more of our energy consumption to the rural cooperatives that you indicated still have been able to secure funding for different energy sourcing?
There's currently not any limitation for the rural co-ops. It would be a matter of the data centers choosing to be located in the service territory of a rural co-op. Data centers have a lot of criteria when they're looking at location. Power supply is a huge part of it, but they need, fiber connectivity. They want quality of life for the kinds of people that, work at their data centers. And then some kinds of data centers, the AI data centers we're talking about a lot these days, don't have to be highly responsive to people using the internet because they're training the AI systems and things like that. But many types of data centers need to be quickly responsive. So the latency of the internet from where the user is to where the data center is important. So they tend to locate those kinds of data centers close to urban areas. So I think it's possible that we would see data center development in Michigan rural co-op territory, but there are a lot of forces that say many of those data centers want to be in the investor-owned utility territories for reasons aside from the electricity itself.
Certainly. And Courtney, I'll let you answer as well. I just wanted to add, I think maybe this question was wondering if there's more ways for people in their states to become a part of a rural co-op or create one as well. So yeah, Courtney, go ahead.
Yeah, I can also let Douglas speak to the technicalities of the geographic range of utility service too. But I would just say that rural co-ops in general are starting behind investor-owned utilities when it comes to clean energy use, just as a general basis. And that's largely has to do with the way they're regulated versus investor-owned utilities, which I won't get into the nitty-gritty of. But the Inflation Reduction Act program that offered these major awards to rural electrical co-ops was like the first intervention point with co-ops when it came to the types of power they use, which is why it was such a significant program in terms of the amount of funding and the types of projects that were being proposed. So this is really like getting them up to speed with clean energy procurement. So it's not to say that if we were to switch our power to clean or to rural, it would be cleaner power. It's just that program is such a benefit to getting them more ahead on this issue. So,
and if I can follow up, the Michigan rural cooperatives, as well as municipal utilities, are subject to the same renewable and clean energy standards as the investor-owned utilities. That was politically difficult when the 2023 bill package was under consideration. They were wanting to be exempted, but the legislature, I'm pleased to say, kept them covered by those standards. And then the question of can you change the territory and get served by a rural co-op under Michigan law. I'm going to skip all of the background on it here. Basically, there's a monopoly. Once a utility serves a given property, they have the perpetual right to serve that property as a monopoly. So if you're currently served by an investor-owned utility, it would only be if the investor-owned utility sold the right to serve you to the rural co-op that you would be able to then be served by the rural co-op. So it's you're stuck.
Thank you both. All right. One question that I'm seeing a common thread through here is concerns around the definition of clean energy with the Michigan laws that passed in 2023. We have folks asking, how did renewables make it into that? And how did, or not renewables, sorry, renewable natural gas, and how did nuclear? So could somebody who had some experience in those conversations shed a little light on that?
I'll take first. Courtney may want to add, but those bills passed, unfortunately, on party line votes with one more Democrat than Republican in each of the houses. And the process of getting to agreement was difficult. Those provisions had to be in to satisfy certain legislators. So that's the result we got. It is still, I want to be clear about this. I did not want to see particularly the gas with carbon capture sequestration in the bill, but we still have the most aggressive transition in terms of the pace at which we're trying to change to clean energy of any state in the country. There are others that are aiming for similar end results, but they started earlier. So we really are pushing about as fast as we can, assuming that we can continue to deliver on what the law says.
Yeah, and I think I would just add too, I keep coming back to the Public Service Commission, but the way that that law is interpreted is largely going to take place through those integrated resource planning dockets at the Public Service Commission. So they're going to be assessing utilities plans for affordability and compliance with these laws in a really important way. So the hope is that, the cleanest, cheapest sources win out just because they make the most sense for the utility planning. So implementation is very, very key to figure out, or to determine kind of which of those sources are prioritized.
Thank you. Again, I just want to remind folks, if you're with the media, please feel free to raise your hand and we will get to that question and give you permission to unmute. AG Nessel, I'm wondering, can you share some examples that you have referenced in your lawsuit with the antitrust? What does that look like historically for the oil industry? There was one question in the chat, is the US blocking cheaper EV imports from China? And so that made me think of this.
Yeah, well, we have a lot of different allegations in our lawsuit, but it essentially, alleges that these oil and gas industries behave no differently than criminal cartels in terms of coming together and deciding that they would, firstly, all the work that they did with the American Petroleum Institute in order to create this doubt about climate change. There are no legitimate scientists out there that don't believe that climate change is real. But of course, they use their influence, in concert, with some really high-priced consulting firms to sort of come up with this plan to sow the seeds of doubt. If everybody believed that climate change was real, and spoiler alert, it is, then of course people wouldn't want to usher in essentially the end of the world eventually, and all of course the problems that we know about and we're seeing right now in terms of the level of like our 100-year reign is not 100 years anymore for our floods, right? It's every year or every 2 years. The tornadoes we're seeing, obviously far more tornadoes, I think, in the state of Michigan than we've seen in different types of tornadoes too that I've ever seen. I mean, the list really goes on and on as to all the issues. It's really expensive for us here in Michigan. But the thing is that if the whole world, and when I say that, I mean expressly the United States and Congress really understood the threat of climate change, then everyone would be demanding more action. And that means, of course, moving towards fewer fossil fuel usage and moving towards clean energy. But a big part of our lawsuit alleges that these companies got together and said, hey, it's cheaper and more profitable for us to use fossil fuels, and that's what we're good at, and that's what we know about. And even though they were protecting their own infrastructure, by the way, from climate change, understanding the real threat that it posed, they wanted the rest of us to believe that it wasn't really happening. And that is a significant part of the allegations that we make, because we would be in such a different place right now, as many other countries are, in terms of making that progress, moving towards, again, EVs and battery storage and other things where we could have had so much innovation. And things would be so different for us now. Our energy would be cleaner and it would be cheaper, but for these, what we allege to be antitrust violations by the fossil fuel companies and the American Petroleum Institute. So that's sort of in a nutshell what some of our allegations are. But obviously, I look forward to litigating this case in court. I will note one more time, when you're talking about where the federal government is on this, it is I can't even express to you how sanctionable I think it is for the DOJ to basically be acting on behalf of these fossil fuel companies to try to interject themselves into having our lawsuit dismissed. If they really truly represented the American people, they would want our lawsuit to be successful. But I think it's important that everybody remember the promise that Donald Trump made during the course of the 2024 campaign, where he said, hey, oil and gas industry, fossil fuel companies, if you raise a certain amount of money for me, you can have anything you want. And he certainly has fulfilled that. The president doesn't always keep his campaign promises, but he sure has on this one.
Yes, I would say he's even gone a step further by buying out projects and paying folks to cancel them, like we have seen with the wind projects happening. So thank you for your work there. We have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to squeeze in just one last one, and this is for anybody. It says, we've seen the price of oil go up because of the war in Iran. Do you know how much of that price increase is real versus going to company profits?
I can answer. As a result of the war in Iran, it does not cost anything more to produce oil in Texas or New Mexico or Pennsylvania. So the price increase is entirely, for those producers, it's entirely incremental profit. Of course, the price goes up to balance world demand with world supply. And the people whose supply has been disrupted, of course, are losing out on what they would have made by producing oil in those places. But the rest of the world is, paying for that. And it would be absolutely appropriate to think of that extra profit for the U.S. and other suppliers who are not interrupted as windfall profits.
Thank you, Douglas. Well, thank you all. We're at the half hour now, so we really appreciate you staying on and answering these questions. I know folks are always thinking about these things when they're at home, and it's a unique opportunity to get to be in front of experts such as yourselves. So thank you to our attendees as well for taking time to be with us today and spend time, I would say, nerding out with us on energy, but also being involved and getting educated on these issues. So we will have a recording of this that we will share around afterwards. But thank you all again for everything you're doing, and thank you to our panelists. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will be in touch.